Hi everyone and welcome back to Stefan Livera Podcast, brought to you by Bold. For American listeners, go to getbold.io and you can buy Bitcoin there and you can sell Bitcoin there and you can find various services there. Now, joining me today on the show, we're going to be talking about Lightning and Lightning payments and Lightning adoption. So joining me today, Danny Stagg from Breez and Dan O'Prey, co-founder of 1A1Z. So Dan and Danny, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So, look, let's just, give us a bit of a background on the report. We don't need to go super deep, but just, what was why did you guys write this report?
Do you want me to kick it off, Dan?
Go for it, Danny.
Awesome. So, long and short of it, media narrative, I think, for quite a long time has been Bitcoin is digital gold, and the medium of exchange narrative has kind of suffered. There's been various attempts over the last decade or so. But the prevailing narrative, especially over the last couple of months, has been digital gold. And one of the things we set out to do is see what's the state of Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. And from there, the kind of report kind of moved out, and we were able to learn about what's happening in various places globally to basically answer the question that Bitcoin isn't just digital gold. It's an everyday working currency.
Yeah. And then Dan, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I got interested in Bitcoin for peer-to-peer electronic cash and decoupling money from the state. So I think like many Bitcoiners over the last sort of year or so, been a bit frustrated with the ETFs, spot ETFs in the US have been great for inflows and for the price of Bitcoin and of course for, attention. But been a little bit frustrated with the pigeonholing of Bitcoin as just a buy, hold, wait, number go up technology, when it really is being used today as a medium of exchange, as money, or as a settlement rail across cross-border remittances. So excited to return to Satoshi's original vision and actually get people using Bitcoin again.
Interesting. So, look, I'm going to slightly disagree a little bit, but we'll get to that later. I think there are, I won't, let's say, bury the lead. My view is, obviously, I'm very much in favor of Lightning. I love using Lightning myself. I just think there's got to be kind of a saturation point that we have to kind of hit first in terms of, store of value adoption. So my view, and I'm not being, let's say, I'm not being prescriptive. I think I'm just being descriptive in the way I describe that. I'm not trying to say you must only hodl. I'm saying I think more people will find a reason to, let's say, buy or earn Bitcoin in some way before we start to really see a lot of actual peer-to-peer payments of it. But let's talk about this. So I think one of the questions you guys answer in your report is this question of, is Bitcoin just digital gold? So do you guys want to spell out your view? Why is Bitcoin not just digital gold from your perspective?
Sure. Yeah. And Stefan, it was good to have some disagreement and make things a little bit more interesting. So, I think, as we note in the report, like the actual end-to-end Bitcoin payments as a pure play currency, right, as a medium exchange or, let alone a unit of account, is still early. It is still happening in cases and growing, but it's still early in that space. I think the area that I'm most excited about is a next step beyond where undoubtedly most of the market is today in the store of value side of things, is using Bitcoin as a underlying settlement rail for other currencies temporarily, and Lightning enabling that. So companies like, Lightspark and IBEX, and then people building on top of that. We have a case study on Osmo, a remittance company, and SAF Money. But users may not even know in those cases that they're using Bitcoin. And I know to many, that may not sound like a good thing. But really what it's doing is delivering, value to the end user of sending fiat currency from one country and receiving it in another country. And that's forcing the infrastructure to be built out for Lightning at scale that can then be leveraged for Bitcoin to Bitcoin payments in the future once more people have Bitcoin, more people earn Bitcoin, as you say. So I don't see it as this like binary between no one using Bitcoin as money at all or everyone using it, and this sort of, crossing the chasm point of which comes first, merchants or consumers, and the sort of chicken and egg piece. I think there is an intermediary piece there where you can go beyond just buy and hold to use as an abstracted away sort of protocol or settlement layer. And then people can actually just send Bitcoin and others can receive fiat as the next step along that before we get to the fully hyper-Bitcoinized Bitcoin to Bitcoin transactions.
Yeah. Danny, anything to add there?
Yeah, I kind of think underneath it, it's what you said, it's nuanced. I don't think it's black and white either. And I think what the report hopefully does is it kicks off a conversation on why we see Bitcoin as a currency, why we see it as a medium of exchange, and why we see it as both, right? Roy wrote a fantastic piece on the full dichotomy of Bitcoin. And I think the report proves that too. But I think what the report gets at is that medium of exchange, that currency, those rails, however you're using Bitcoin, is far more than just digital gold. And I think you're still right. There's still many more people to kind of on board with it being it's a fantastic store of value. We all know that, it's a no-brainer. But I think that bigger story of what we're seeing, the kind of undercurrents and what's been built, maybe 6 or 10 years ago, the infrastructure wasn't there to do the things that you can now do with Bitcoin. So we're very much at the start of this kind of trajectory, which I think is super exciting.
And I'd say also, even if you don't think it's there yet, if you do think it could get there one day, it's potentially dangerous or concerning for people to pigeonhole Bitcoin in their mind as just this one thing that you buy through an ETF or you buy and put in cold storage forever, because you'll likely never get there if that's the start and end of people's perceptions of Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I think I mostly agree that there is. And I like the report that in that it shows people, wait a second, you might have thought there weren't that many people using Lightning, but actually look how many people who can use Lightning. So I think that's certainly something novel, something new. But I think the part where I'm sort of not as, I think it's just going to naturally happen on its own, right? Like even if all these, yes, we might criticize a lot of the new, let's say new coiners who are coming in and maybe they just go by, or they go by the ETF, or they go by the Bitcoin treasury companies and so on, and they're not getting real Bitcoin. Of course, we want, not your keys, not your coins. We want as many people to, hold their keys as possible. But that is fundamentally the process of getting adoption, right? So we've got this kind of store of value happening at one side, but we've also got this medium of exchange, as in a direct method of payment aspect, which is growing also. And then I think to the point you mentioned earlier, Dan, that there's also this kind of in the background use case, right? So I think over the years, people have had these debates, right, about hodling versus spending, and they're kind of set against each other in a way, and maybe that's a false dichotomy. I think also historically, in the earlier years, people spoke about remittance, right? They said, or remittance, I guess it was kind of rebranded. And so that's maybe another angle that can be used. But of course, that kind of also plays in with stablecoins. But I want to bring it back to a really interesting number, 650 million. So can you tell us a little bit about that number? What is it? What's the significance of this number?
So the number is the amount of people that can access the Lightning Network today. And it's great to see. And I think it's indicative of what Lightning can do or what Lightning's achieved and where it's at. I think it's a kind of, what we call it, a kind of ground up adoption of it. But this is happening in a world in which there's still people today that critique Lightning as potentially failing, period, right? And I think that's just not necessarily true. So if you look at some of the applications that have integrated Lightning, even in the last year, you look at a company like Coinbase, you look at Nubank, and those are huge organizations that can reach far more people around the globe. And so I think what we're trying to get at here is say to folks, kind of what I just alluded to before, the infrastructure's in place to do the things that we want to do that potentially weren't there before. And that's kind of where we go with the report.
Yeah, I see. And so I guess just to spell this out for listeners, maybe if you are, let's say, an intelligent layman, but you're not sort of savvy with how Lightning has developed, I think it's fair to say in the early years of Lightning, when Lightning first went on the mainnet in 2018 and sort of 2019, in those early years, it required a lot more technical chops to take Lightning payment, right? Because you had to think about inbound liquidity. You had to have an always online server. There was no Lightning address. There was no kind of one Lightning thing that you can pay to. I mean, there was Keysand, but there weren't as many easy ways to do this. Whereas now, I think we've reached a certain level of maturity that now you don't necessarily have to be a Lightning technical genius to be able to accept Lightning payments. And I think that's probably an important point just for people to understand the difference, right? If we compare 2018, the early days of mainnet Lightning, to now early 2025. So do you guys want to explain a little bit on some of the shifts you have seen over that time in Lightning?
Yeah, I wanted to just say one of the things you mentioned there is, and we do actually mention this in the report too, is that the kind of false promise of what Lightning was and what Lightning could do early on as well. There's some things that potentially went to market, maybe pitched it in a way that didn't live up to the promises that it had, right? And as you mentioned, it's matured now. The tools are there. Obviously, at Breez, self-custodial, self-custody at scale, basically, which is awesome, right? The user experience is night and day. So I kind of see this maturation as a really solid base from what we could build on.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, that usability, the channel management, liquidity management, a lot of that has been a lot more automated and a lot more easier for end users, but especially for businesses with the amount of companies and the amount of investments that's gone into companies building tooling for these businesses. There's a variety of different options. In the report, we have a sort of snapshot overview of some of the main players. It's not comprehensive, but some of the main players in each of the different buckets. And if you look through like Lightning as a service and hosting providers, liquidity providers, the tooling there makes it super simple for businesses that don't want to manage their own node but could still retain your keys, or they could outsource it fully. So there's a variety of different options for businesses to make it super easy for them to accept or add Lightning payments.
Yeah. And just for the audio listeners, I'll quickly read out a few. So Coinbase, 110 million plus, Binance, 200 million plus, OKX, 50 million plus, Cash App, 57 million plus, New, I presume that's Nubank, 100 million plus, Kraken, 13 million, and some of the earlier, like Bitfinex is pretty early. They had 3 million plus, but they were one of the first to do it. So there's a lot of people who can access Lightning. Now, I guess the caveat would be a lot of these people might, they might have an app on their phone accessing Lightning, but they may never have actually used that, right? It might be sort of, it's just it's kind of a setting for them. It might as well be a setting that they've never actually gone and tapped. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think that, and we don't allude to, we're not alluding that every single one of these 650 million are doing it right now. That's just not true, right? But what we're saying is the fact that they can access this technology is the cool part. Now, how do we get them on there? And there are hurdles. There's still hurdles today. UX can always improve. That's one thing that we mention, is that improving that user experience is going to help integrating into mainstream applications where Bitcoin is a part of your experience. And those kind of things will help. And obviously regulation. There are some countries, the biggest blocker, or one of the biggest blockers, is capital gains tax. That's a huge blocker to a medium of exchange because it adds a mental and cost hurdle from you easily exchanging. But as the premise goes, is that this is the foundation, right? The foundation's there, and the fact that you can reach those people today with Lightning is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think at first the usage that is most reported is exchange to exchange, right? It's still driven by that trading users, particularly amongst the names and the large scale centralized exchanges that you mentioned. Moving funds between those exchanges or on and off exchanges for the purposes of trading is the primary driver. And that's going to get people familiar with Lightning. It's going to get them to understand the benefits and get them to understand that they have it available in a wallet that's already funded, that they already have. From there, they can then, start to look at, interoperable P2P or payments or remittance beyond that. So I think that the store of value and trading use case will actually help drive awareness and real usage of Lightning that can then be leveraged beyond that as a payment mechanism.
Yeah, and actually, one other thing that has come up a little bit in our conversation is peer-to-peer, right? Because that's one angle where a critic, now I'm a supporter of Lightning, but a critic could say, hey, you guys sold this as peer-to-peer, but actually, doesn't it look a bit more like bank-to-bank? What do you guys think about that?
It's both, right? Users have options. If you want to outsource everything and just use a fully, centralized exchange and use Lightning through that, that's fine if that's what's for you. If you want to hold your own keys but not manage the node, that's fine. Or if you want to do it all yourself, the options are there too. And, obviously Breez, companies like Breez have made that super easy for end users to do. So there is the full spectrum. The numbers that we report on in the report are the numbers of users most largely, I think exclusively at centralized exchanges, just because the numbers out there are a little bit trickier to get for, anonymous channels and self-hosted, wallets. But that tooling has come a long way as well.
Yeah, it's the nuance, right? That's it, and you can do it. That's the thing. It's not an impossibility now. You can do it if you wish to do it, and I think over time, it goes to that next level of adoption is bringing those experiences into mainstream applications. I'm going to use another Roy blog, but more apps with Lightning, not more Lightning apps, and I think that's kind of the thing that I will see kick us off, and then the same thing will happen, right? And people will find peer-to-peer, and they'll find self-custody, and they kind of go down that path. So it's kind of just a great platform, and the fact that we have so many people that have access is frankly wild, but also, again, how encouraging is that for the future?
Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices, such as the Cold Card Mark IV and the new Cold Card Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now, you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card. This episode brought to you by Galloy. They are building banking software for the Bitcoin age. So if you are with a bank, a fintech, or a startup looking to offer some kind of Bitcoin product, whether that is a Bitcoin collateralized loan, deposit accounts, or payments, Galloy can help you. Their latest product is called Lana. It is a loans management platform, and you can use this to come to market quickly and offer a loans or Bitcoin collateralized lending product for your customers. Now, Galloy have a lot of experience in the space. They started with Blink Wallet in 2020, and they've since grown this to become a community favorite over time. And so they have a lot of experience making things work in a secure, reliable, and scalable way. So if you need assistance coming to market quickly with a Bitcoin banking product, such as lending or deposits or payments, talk to the team at Galloy. You can email them. The email is biz@galloy.io, or go to the website galloy.io. And now back to the show. Yeah. I want to touch onto mindsets of adoption and I guess different groups here. So I'm going to put it into two camps here, right? There's kind of the non-Bitcoin, quote unquote, crypto world or shitcoin world. And then there's, let's say, fiat companies, right, that have nothing to do with crypto, and they some of them are now actually adopting Lightning. And so I'm curious to get your take on maybe what were some of the hurdles for them. Like in the crypto world, is it more just that they were more interested in the kind of lending and degen and these kinds of uses, or maybe they fell in love with like this kind of copy paste a static address sort of user experience, and so Lightning was kind of like this alien thing for them for some time, and now we're starting to see some of those, let's say, crypto wallets and multi-coin wallets actually start to bring, okay, yeah, actually we do need to bring in Lightning support. So maybe that's one thing we've seen there. And then on the fiat side, it's that, it just is faster and easier. So I'm curious if you guys have any takes on that, any thoughts on what it took to drive some of that adoption, where we are there on those fronts.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to start with, I'm still constantly surprised by how few people actually are aware of Lightning still, particularly in the crypto world, right? We still get the questions of Bitcoin can only do 7 transactions a second, right? Like everyone is still sort of stuck in this old pre-Lightning 2015 era understanding of what Bitcoin is and what it can do. And then when they compare that to the throughput of, Solana or Optimism or, pick your favorite centralized, fake blockchain, then it looks unfavorable. But then when you mention Lightning, it actually enables Bitcoin payments at the same scale or larger, can horizontally scale much more significantly than these centralized chains. People are, still a lot of people have not heard of it yet, which is quite shocking. And, also another goal of the report is just to keep hammering home that, these layers do exist and Bitcoin has evolved, maybe not as quickly as other chains, but for a good reason. And making people aware of that, particularly businesses, right? I think, they still have stuck in those perceptions. Other chain/coin/companies /foundations /common enterprises, they have marketing teams, they have business development teams, they have ecosystem development teams that are giving funding to these different companies to support their chains, right? Bitcoin and Lightning has none of that. We as the community are functioning as that. And so making sure that businesses, hear about and are up to date with what Bitcoin is and what Lightning can do, versus, alternatives, is really, really critical, as awareness is still, one of the biggest hurdles.
Yeah. To add on that, awareness, that is on the money. And so there are folks are looking for these options. They know the interest in Bitcoin. And so if we look at, say, use crypto applications, mostly folks there are using Bitcoin or think of Bitcoin for trading, or they're using crypto for trading. And so those folks want to access this $2 trillion market, and they're just unaware of the tooling that's available. And so like Dan said, one of the points of the report is to show folks with that ecosystem graphic, yes, it's a snapshot, and yes, there's so many more businesses that we can include, but there is so many options. There are so many options for folks to use tools and integrate Lightning. And then what you actually see is not necessarily folks are anti-Bitcoin or any of the kind of ideology stuff. It's just they're just unaware of how they can connect to it because they don't know the tooling's there, right? And then when it comes to those in the fiat world, right, interested, but there's so much noise out there. It's very hard to cut through, and we are up against a lot of investment and a lot of vested interest. And this use media is a good example. If you think about the outlets of which you report on Bitcoin, they're very limited. And that's whilst, people can, dump on the fact they don't like the media is still a great reach for many folks. And if we can't reach those folks, they're not aware of us. And therefore we kind of operate here. And then those who lead the narrative get to decide what people talk about. So awareness is clearly a huge hurdle. I don't think the tooling's a hurdle now, and I think it's showing people the utility, the benefits, and the reach, right? And that's again a point of why we want to talk about the huge amount of people that can access this technology. Is because folks know that people want it, and there's no Bitcoin Inc. marketing CEO who's coming in and dictating this. This is ground up adoption. And that's why the folks have integrated it at different companies, is because their users want it. So if we can solve that awareness issue, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, you touched on this awareness piece, and I think it's very important because I guess we're just living in this world now where there's just so many competing demands on people's attention. typical, let's say, younger people nowadays are they're sitting there scrolling on their feed, whether that's Instagram or TikTok or X or whatever. And I guess it's about sort of punching through and breaking through, because ultimately we want, I think all of us, at least, and probably most listeners, want more people to use Bitcoin, right? We want more people, whether you are hodling or spending and earning Bitcoin. I want you to, we want more people to use it. And in a sense, all these network effects are competing with each other, right? Like there's the fiat system, network effects, and kind of off of that, there's, the PayPals of the world and so on. And you have sort of the fiat processing side of it. And then there's our Bitcoin network, and we want more people to actually come and use that. And so I think that's been a big part of our challenge, is getting more people to understand that, yes, these things are now getting to a level where it's not that hard. You don't have to be a technical genius. It's available on simple apps. I think another interesting one that I'm curious if you guys have a thought on this is around the swap servers. So things like, especially in like crypto world, there's a lot of people who want to swap between maybe stablecoin and Bitcoin or other things. What's your view on that? Is it that, Bitcoin and Lightning up until recently hasn't been as integrated into these swap servers, or just not as prominent into some of these swap services?
Yeah, I think, just to touch, as you say, sort of swapping between Bitcoin and stable coins, something that will make that a lot simpler and more atomic is the recent announcement out of Plan B in El Salvador of Tether coming to Taproot assets and hence to Lightning as well. So actually having, the world's largest stablecoin by far coming to Lightning will be a bridge between the fiat world and the network effects of that, which, we can't deny are still, very desirable in large parts of the world, and particularly, Latin America, where they want dollarized exposure and they want to use, Tron because it's fast and cheap and free. Now Lightning and Tether will have an alternative for that that's based on Bitcoin and actually decentralized. So that will help, bridge those worlds and bring new users with that new use case over to Lightning and ultimately to Bitcoin too. And to your point, I think it'll make it easier to create, atomic swaps between stable coins and Bitcoin. I think probably, and could be wrong on this, but probably the main approach to that is through using Liquid today, where Lightning's also compatible with Liquid, the Bitcoin side chain, which has stable coins and other assets being issuable on them. But yeah, the DeFi DEX trading use case hasn't really come to Bitcoin yet. Have sort of, mixed feelings on that, being a Bitcoin maximalist and not really believing in anything worth swapping it for. But stablecoins, I think, are probably the only, or at least the obvious for now, tokens that will be required to provide liquidity between the two, and Tether coming to Lightning should, I believe, help with that.
I haven't got much to add on that. I think Dan actually did a great roundup of that, but I would say that what you do see is that Lightning is this common language that's going to tie together these various sub-networks, etc. And I think the development that we'll see over the next couple of years, because people that want to build on Bitcoin, is only net good for Bitcoin. So the more this awareness piece comes from building products, it comes from building things that people want, and let the market decide. Yeah.
I'm also curious if you guys have any take on what were some of the drivers of getting more Lightning adoption. It might be fair to say that the spam, it depends on people's view, but I think it was spam in 2023 with all the retardinals or ordinals and inscriptions and BRC20 and whatever. That kind of drove a lot of fees on main chain Bitcoin. And arguably, that might have been part of the impetus for some of the large players in the industry, the Binances and the Coinbases of the world, to implement Lightning. I'm curious if you see it that way, or was it a tooling thing? Was it just, it just took time? What's your view?
I'm going to all of the above, right? So if there's people that come from necessity, so they have a serious issue for their users. When your users are complaining about fees, that's, for some folks, it's a huge thing. So they're trying to find a way to get around that. Lightning obviously helps. So I think that's one part of it. I do think there has to be a belief as well. And I think there is a belief in the technology. And I know that's a bit of a fluffy answer, but I think you need folks that believe in the path and where you're going, right? And I think a lot of those who integrate or have integrated Lightning have done so with the belief in it.
Like they don't believe it's going away, right? Like maybe you could have made that argument in 2019 when it was so early and small, and maybe now, you know, the last year or two, it's been way more clear that it sort of seems more clear Lightning's here to stay.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the Lightning is dead. People are starting to sound like the Bitcoin is dead people. And, you know, we draw some parallels to early Bitcoin on-chain payments and, you know, failed experiment. We're done. You know, Bitcoin's not for payments. No one's going to buy coffee in Bitcoin, right? The old meme. But now, you know, we had the same thing with Lightning, right? We had a lot of early explosion and Danny touched on it, right? Overhype around it. And, you know, I think we got a little bit carried away with where the state of it was. And it still does have, you know, some further scaling pieces to do and, to get, you know, fully global, you know, Visa level scale. But, you know, it is a lot more mature today. And so just because, you know, there were challenges in the early days and, you know, 19 and 20 around Lightning or with Bitcoin payments and 14, 15 doesn't mean that, you know, try it once and not going to happen in the future. Lightning is here, as you say. It's going to stay. It's not going to die. It's only getting better. There's still a lot more investment coming in, a lot more, you know, merchants adding it, a lot more businesses, a lot more interesting use cases, right? Like, you know, small ones, but, you know, Nostar, I'm sure a lot of listeners are familiar with the decentralized social media application and the ability to zap and send micro payments, the ability to stream payments, the ability to split payments, right? So all of these things that just weren't, or microtransactions just generally, aren't possible with the current fiat system and the cost of debit cards for each of those different things. So, starting to see more and more applications, you know, picking those up, and, you know, Lightning's only as dead as the usage, and the usage is increasing, not decreasing, as we show.
I was going to add here as well. I think there's a kind of cultural talking point in general, and it's not just limited to Bitcoin. Is I think most folks expect something tomorrow, right? And it's here and it's done and off we go, and it didn't work, and let's move on. And if you did that with technologies that foundational to how we exist right now, we're in 3 different locations talking at once, we wouldn't have got anywhere, right? And I think that's the kind of pathway of Bitcoin is it's kind of just doing its own path, and it's getting there. And yeah, some things aren't going to work, and there are going to be things that will work long term may, you know, stumble and trip. And I think this kind of cultural, like, oh, that's it, it's done, you know, just to be honest, just for a tweet so you can get a bit of engagement farming, it's a bit boring. And, you know, this will be adults, like, we want Bitcoin in the hands of as many people. Here's the technology to do it. Let's get building. And I'm kind of a little bit over the kind of, you know, the hot take tweets, because it doesn't really do anything. You know, the fact is, we're getting Bitcoin in the hands of people.
The lead sponsor of this show is Bold, the best place to buy, sell, and save Bitcoin. For listeners in the US, Bold lets you secure your financial future with complete peace of mind by integrating a low-fee, Bitcoin-only brokerage with next-gen multi-sig vaults. With Bold, you can smash buy Bitcoin or set a DCA plan for only 0.99% fees and seamlessly deposit the Bitcoin direct to your Bold vault. The Bold Vault is a 2 or 3 collaborative multi-sig where you hold 2 keys and Bold holds 1 as a redundant backup, protecting against loss or theft. You can use Trezor, Ledger, or Coldcard hardware wallets to spin up a Bold Vault in just a few minutes, and the Bold Vault is the only collaborative custody vault available with 0 monthly fees. They're also offering 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys and $25 of free Bitcoin when you buy $100 of Bitcoin or more. Try Bold today and upgrade your stacking experience over at getbold.io. And now, back to the show. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the big improvements that we've seen. I think it would be good if you guys can spell out some of the improvements you've seen, you know, recently in terms of whether that's Lightning on the technical side or kind of at the product level. What kinds of things have helped move that needle to make it more accessible?
I'm going to say we touched on UX, and UX is improving all the time, right? And there are different applications and businesses that do so. I'm going to use Breez as an example, right? Last year, we released a new implementation of our SDK, the nodeless implementation. I personally think it's one of the best Lightning UXs out there. It's great. if you haven't used it, try any of the apps that have integrated it, like your Paki. Awesome experience, and I think it's those things that move forward, paired with the large integrations, because that awareness is invaluable. So it's quite simple for me, is that we keep building.
Yeah. So just to spell out for listeners, this is the using Liquid. So basically, the merchant can set up a shop more easily because historically they might have had to think about Lightning channels, opening, closing, rebalancing, resizing the channel, and all these other elements to it. Whereas what this nodeless implementation is doing is it presents a Lightning invoice to the end user. That end user can pay it with a standard Lightning wallet or app, and then it's paid with Lightning. But actually, in the background, it's kind of Bolts.exchange is doing a swap, and that merchant or user in this case is receiving LBTC, and they can then later use that LBTC to kind of flip that back into Bitcoin or into fiat if they need it for their bills and so on, just so people understand what's happening there.
Yeah, and to use another example of a company that I think is doing some interesting things is Money Badger, the guys that help Pick and Pay with their integration in South Africa. So one of the issues that a lot of merchants have is that they have a point of sale,
like a terminal,
machine, like a terminal, and they're specifically built for the fiat world, right? And I'm going to kind of abbreviate a lot of this. You can go on their website and learn about it, but the long and short of it is you use your phone to pay with Bitcoin. On the back end, it sorts it out and goes to Money Badger, and those at Pick and Pay, basically, who are on the checkout, don't have to worry about it. So what you're doing is you're making that experience far easier for merchants to accept Bitcoin in existing POS systems, which is, I think, is really cool. And so, again, it all goes down to the user experience for me. The more we improve that, the more we make it more seamless and compete with. The fact is, right now, I just get my card out and tap it and off I go. That's what we're up against. That's the kind of experience, regardless of what's happening on the back end, which we talk about in the report. The thing is that we have to appear to match or improve on that experience.
Right. VCs talk about, needing 10x better UX, right? Sorry, go on, Dan.
Well, I was just going to mention on the 10x UX, you mentioned, Stefan, earlier, the Lightning addresses, and I think, sending Bitcoin as easy as sending an email. We've only just scratched the surface there on how that can be, super convenient, global, borderless, interoperable. And then companies like Lightspark have created an extension of Lightning addresses called UMA, Universal Money Addresses, which make sending fiat currencies and Bitcoin through a Lightning address based system super simple as well. So as that gets rolled out, across some of these major exchanges, major peer-to-peer apps, the ability to just, send Bitcoin or send, I send dollars, you receive Bitcoin, and it's just super seamless regardless of which app or exchange or broker we're using. I think that's super early days, and really just, that's going to be huge in terms of money movement meets email.
Yeah, I think things like apps that have like a contact list built into them, or these might be really convenient over time. That hopefully, if Lightning can get built into them. The other point I was going to bring up actually is how in the Pick and Pay example that you mentioned, Danny, I believe they have shared some of the stats on what percent of the payments were Bitcoin and Lightning, and what were other things, and they've actually shown a much larger Bitcoin and Lightning percentage than, let's say, a Bitrefill as an example, which I found curious. I'm curious if you have any thought on why that is, or is it just, it just is the more natural fit in that case?
Well, I think, so market-wise, there are things, obviously in South Africa, Luno and et cetera, and Bitcoin adoption is actually quite strong in South Africa. I think that the reason that folks pay with Bitcoin is, A, the value appreciated, and B, it's a great experience.
It's the Bitcoin wealth effect.
Yeah, and so folks don't see it necessarily as I can't let go of that. They're just saying, okay, I'm going to benefit on that because it affects my life today, right? And I think, again, it's all nuance, right? It's not like black or white, but like I think what you see at Pick and Pay as a result of an improving UX and people want to pay with Bitcoin. And it looks as though it's going pretty well there, which is cool.
I guess looking forward, Lightning adoption, what do you see as the big hurdles or things to be overcome, or, you know, factors? Is it social and culture? Is it economic? Is it technical? What are you seeing there?
I think that the game changer is integrating into mainstream applications, and that's going to come from awareness and better UX. I see it as the Metas of this world, the X's of this world. I know they're probably going to go down a Visa route, but they shouldn't. Bring in directly peer-to-peer Bitcoin payments into these applications where it's integrated into the user experience. You know, billions of people use WhatsApp. Imagine just sending some sats on WhatsApp at the click of a button. That's where I see the real hockey stick kind of movement. To get there, we need to get the developers building with Bitcoin and making sure they know the tools are there. And again, it kind of all links to awareness as well. Awareness is such a big factor. And we have a lot of loud voices within our ecosystem, which is great. But I think we could do a better job on using our voices better, because I think what we sometimes do is get a bit of an echo chamber, and we need to really branch out of that echo chamber and talk to these, you know, folks in different verticals. So you can speak to folks in crypto, those in fintech, and not make it about ideology. Just show it the tools and show the tech. If you want to get into the ideology stuff, cool, get into that later. But like, show them the utility for them now, and then we'll get there. And I feel really confident in this, because I think what the report's showing is it's in the hands of people now. So it's up to us to get that to resonate and get those builders building the tools that we need.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people might not be clear on just how much easier it is to implement Lightning now, right? Like, if you could just explain a little bit on the SDK side, actually, how long does it take for an engineer to implement Breez SDK? Like, just for people to understand that, because I think that's a point that maybe not a lot of people get yet.
Yeah, it's just a couple lines of code. So with with Breez, it's free, it's open source, and you can plug and play and any time. It's not hard. The whole point is an end-to-end solution. You drop in a couple of lines of code and kind of off you go. You know, obviously companies want to then build the experience and design it and all of those things, but on the like technical side, very, very simple. There's some folks, I think Carlos at Yapaki was talking about how simple it was on Stacker News the other week, and we have like tutorials. I think in 21 minutes we showed how you could implement it into an app. So and this isn't hyperbole either. This is it, and that's what we're trying to say about how easy these tools are to use today. And the fact it's free, it's open source, so you can audit it and have a little look at it all. It's kind of a bit of a no-brainer. So hopefully, or what we're seeing is more folks implementing now, and especially with Nodeless as well, like that experience for the end user or someone who's maybe unfamiliar with Bitcoin or even Lightning. They don't need to worry about channel management. They don't have to worry about setup fees. You just off you go. So from both sides, devs, it's super, super easy. You can go to breez.technology and check out what implementation works for you. You can go on our GitHub. You can go and check the repos yourself. It's super, super simple to do today, which is awesome. Yeah.
And Dan, anything to add from your side?
And in terms of how easy it is to adopt?
And also just what it's going to take for more adoption, right? Like, do you think it's a social thing? Is it an economic thing, a technical thing? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on this earlier with the next step for me being, less Bitcoiner, but more fiat to fiat as a starting point. And again, just sort of making that sort of seamless on and off ramps, maybe completely abstracted away from the user, maybe completely abstracted away from like the actual businesses that are providing these services to users to start with. Right. But that, make fiat cheaper and faster is not the goal here. There still will be fees involved with conversion between different currencies for the payments, for the remittances, and then Bitcoin can then be introduced as or alongside as a cheaper alternative to that if you want to use Bitcoin directly. Or if you're just a Bitcoiner, you can, if you're already sold, just use Bitcoin directly. So I see that as a driver of business adoption. And then I see that as a sort of Trojan horse stepping stone of pushing out the infrastructure across companies where users don't need to know or care what they're using under the hood in the same way most users don't know they're using TCP/IP right now. But over time, the benefits of just using Bitcoin and having the ability to use Bitcoin in a more circular economy will win out on cost and speed.
Yeah. And do you mind spelling out what you think the cost would be versus, let's say, credit card or typical fiat payment rails?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're looking at merchants, let's use merchants as an example. 3.5% that you're getting charged, and you're paying to take payments. And Jeff Booth mentioned something recently on a podcast where he said, like, the fact that you pay to take payments in the future is just not going to be a thing. So right now, if you wanted to go fully self-custodial, you kind of can, and you're looking at fractions of the cost. Like it's exponentially cheaper. So right now, what you're seeing as a consumer as well, it's another hidden tax on anything you buy. 3.5%. We write in the report that you get all these lovely rewards with your credit cards if you're still paying in fiat. Well, that's just basically what the merchant's paying the processor. We can eliminate all of those costs, and it's just going to be more value in your pocket means more value out in the world. So it's going to be so much cheaper that it's the idea of paying for a processor is kind of gone.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of other benefits to the merchants as well in terms of the lack of chargebacks. Like we touched on one of the charities that actually loses money when someone donates $5 and then charges it back, and they end up having to pay fees. And actually just instant access to the liquidity and surety of finality that the funds that are donated or paid are available for immediate use and aren't going to be clawed back later. So the administrative overhead and the certainty and the ability to then use that capital rather than waiting 30, 60, 90 days for the funds to actually settle and be available is a huge game changer on the merchant side as well, not just the benefits to consumers.
Yeah. And I guess, as I understand on Lightning today, typical routing payments, I mean, just rough, it might be 0.4% or something like that, 0.3% maybe. It just kind of depends on what you end up paying, but it might be something in that range. And so that obviously is much cheaper than most of the fiat payment rails that you would otherwise be using. And so that hopefully gives people some loose idea, but obviously it's a bit of a variable question here.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at remittance, you could use remittance as another example. We bring up like BitNob as one example in the report, and so there's other factors that come into it. So we talk about these percentages of costs, which can be exorbitant depending on the route that you need to move money. But actually, there's another thing that you forget, which is that to send that money, therefore you have to accumulate a higher value to send to make it affordable. So now with Lightning, say you're in Nigeria and you want to send money to the US, you can send that $10 remittance without worrying. Whereas traditionally, that is just impossible. And my background, I used to work for a remittance company. I know, and they were trying to make things cheaper. And when you look at it, you sit there and you go, it's just moving digits on a computer. It shouldn't cost that much. And imagine that value going back into the pockets of people that need it. And then, as another benefit, is the reach that you can get. So these fiat rails and the bureaucracy and all of that, right now, we can send money wherever you want. And we all know this. And it's kind of, second nature. But to some folks where you're like, you can send it anywhere in the world, like, done, it's there. That's just not an experience that happens unless you're privileged, right? And so I'm privileged being British. I live in the US. I send money between the two. It's a very, very good experience. But if you're trying to send it to a country where bureaucracy kind of reigns supreme, just not happening. So there's so many other added benefits too on cost. time, all of those things. So it's just wild.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. I think those are kind of the key points that'd be good to hit. Any final point? Any last takeaway that you want listeners to take away?
Bitcoin is not just digital gold; it's an everyday currency. I think that's it. I want folks to see what I believe Bitcoin should be and will be and is today. I'm not interested in the kind of, if Bitcoin isn't used as a medium of exchange, I'm kind of like, cool, hasn't really done what I personally am interested in. I firmly see it as a currency. I see it as something that unlocks an economy that can only kind of be paralleled to the internet. That's the only comparison. And so if anyone was, like, what do you think from the whole report? What do I want someone to take away? I want to take away that Bitcoin's more than just digital gold.
Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, I'd say if you haven't used, or if you've never heard of Lightning before, firstly, go try a Lightning wallet. I'm sure most in this audience have. But if you haven't used it for a while or, a few years, you may be shocked at how much things have changed. Go try, download Breez, go make a Lightning payment. It's actually, super simple today. And then, if you are a holder and you do just believe the store of value and you don't want to spend your Bitcoin because you think it's going to go up, there's always more fiat, that you can use instead of spending your fiat. Go spend some Bitcoin and buy some Bitcoin back with the fiat that you were going to spend, and start actually testing out using Bitcoin payments today and see for yourself, because I think most people will be very pleasantly surprised at how far the ecosystem and the infrastructure has come.
Excellent. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes. So Dan and Danny, thanks for joining me today.
Cheers,
Thank you so much for having us.